Hello! I would be very pleased if you would like the video. Subscribe so you don't miss new videos every day that will help you relax. I'm also curious where you are listening to me from and what time it is now. Write it in the comments. Enjoy watching! The first light of dawn crept slowly across the banks of the James River. Mist hovered above the still waters, soft and silvery, as if the world itself was exhaling after a long night. Birds began to stir in the tall cypress trees, their faint calls mixing with the gentle rustle of the reeds. It was the year 1608, and the settlement of Jamestown, little more than a cluster of wooden huts surrounded by a crude palisade, was awakening to another uncertain day. Thomas Harwood rose before the sun, as he always did. The damp chill of the early morning clung to his clothes and bit through his woolen shirt. He stretched his back, feeling the ache from the long days of labor, tilling the rough soil, hauling water, cutting timber. Life here was not gentle. Every sunrise brought both hope and hardship, and every sunset was a small victory for survival. He stepped outside his hut, the door creaking on its wooden hinges. The smell of wet earth and wood smoke filled his lungs. Across the clearing, other colonists were beginning to stir. Some tended to the small fire pits, coaxing embers back to life. Others checked the crude fencing that surrounded the settlement, ever wary of wolves, or worse, the silent movements of Powhatan scouts in the forest beyond. Thomas paused by the edge of the palisade. Beyond it lay a world that was both breathtaking and merciless. The endless forest seemed to whisper secrets in the morning wind, its canopy hiding countless unseen eyes. He had come here 3 years ago from Bristol, England, full of hope and dreams of owning land, of building something that would last. Yet the reality of this new world had stripped away any illusions he once held. The colony struggled against starvation, disease, and isolation. Supplies from England were rare and uncertain. Many who had arrived with bright eyes and bold spirits now lay buried in the small graveyard just beyond the fort's edge. Each grave was marked with a wooden cross, and each one told a story of hope met with the harsh hand of fate. Still, Thomas and the others persevered. There was something powerful, almost holy, about carving a life from wilderness. The promise of freedom, of new beginnings, held them fast. He made his way to the well, drawing up a bucket of cold water. The rope groaned as he pulled, the wooden handle rough beneath his fingers. Nearby, Martha Price, a young woman barely 20, was already tending to a small cooking fire. Her hands were red from washing pots in the river. She nodded at him politely. "Morning, Thomas," she said softly, her accent still carrying the melody of London streets. "Morning, Martha," he replied. "We'll have fair weather today, I think." "Aye," she said, glancing at the pale sky. "If we're blessed." The two shared a brief smile before turning back to their tasks. There was comfort in the routine, small gestures of normal life in a place that often felt anything but normal. By the time the sun had lifted above the treetops, the settlement was alive with activity. Men worked in the fields, hacking away at stubborn clay and rock. Others repaired the palisade, driven by constant fear of attack. The women baked bread, boiled roots, and patched clothing worn thin by labor. Thomas joined the men at the edge of the fields, where crude rows of corn pushed through the soil. The natives had taught them how to grow it, the one gift that had kept many alive through the lean seasons. He still remembered the first time he saw the Powhatan people, tall and proud, their bodies painted in ochre and ash. They moved through the forest like shadows, quiet and sure. At first, there had been trade, corn for beads, fish for tools. But mistrust came quickly, misunderstandings turned to threats, and threats to violence. Now, both sides lived in uneasy silence, separated by a wall of fear. Thomas bent low, checking the young plants. He could hear John Smith barking orders nearby, his voice carrying above the sound of axes and hammers. Smith was a soldier, a man of iron discipline. Without him, Jamestown might not have survived at all. But even he could not fight hunger or disease. As the morning wore on, the heat grew heavy. The air smelled of resin and pine. Sweat ran down Thomas's neck as he swung his hoe, turning over the soil again and again. Around him, the men worked in silence, broken only by the occasional curse or cough. The ground was rich but stubborn, full of roots that tangled the tools and slowed their progress. By noon, they stopped to rest. The sun burned white overhead, and the shade beneath the trees offered little relief. Martha and the other women brought bowls of thin stew, made from dried peas and salted meat. It was meager fare, but none complained. Hunger taught gratitude in its own hard way. Thomas sat with his back to a log, eating slowly, his eyes drifting toward the river. Beyond the shimmer of light on the water, he could almost see the ships that had brought him here. The Susan Constant, the Godspeed, the Discovery. So much hope had sailed with them across the ocean. So much fear, too. He thought of England sometimes, of the crowded streets, the sound of bells from the church tower, the smell of rain on cobblestone. But he no longer felt that he belonged there. The wilderness had claimed him. It had changed him. In the distance, thunder rumbled faintly. A storm was coming. By early afternoon, the light over the James River had changed. The soft gold of morning had turned to a harsh, white glare that pressed against the eyes. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of wet leaves and distant thunder. The colonists could feel it, the weight of a storm building over the endless green canopy. Thomas looked up from his work in the fields, wiping sweat from his brow with a sleeve darkened by soil. The world had gone still, as though the very forest was holding its breath. Even the birds had fallen silent. John Smith stood nearby, his face turned toward the horizon. "Best return before the rain breaks," he said. His voice carried the tone of command that no one dared to question. "Bring the tools in, every last one. We can't afford to lose more to the mud." The men nodded and began to gather their things. Every tool was precious. Iron hoes, hammers, saws, brought across the ocean at great cost. The loss of even one could mean days of lost labor. Thomas slung his hoe over his shoulder and made his way toward the wooden palisade that surrounded the settlement. The air was darkening fast, clouds rolling in from the east like a curtain drawn across the sky. The wind began to rise, bending the tops of the trees, whispering through the gaps in the walls. By the time the first drops fell, most of the colonists had retreated indoors. Rain drummed against the rough wooden roofs, the sound echoing through the small fort like a heartbeat. Thomas ducked into the longhouse used as a communal store and workshop. Inside, the air smelled of resin, smoke, and damp leather. A few men sat hunched over a small fire in the hearth, repairing tools or mending boots. One of them, William Hunt, looked up as Thomas entered. "Another storm," he muttered, shaking his head, "as if the heavens themselves were testing us." "They've been testing us since the first day," Thomas replied, setting his hoe aside. He leaned against the wall, listening to the wind howl outside. For a while, the men spoke little. The storm raged over the fort, shaking the timbers, sending sheets of rain cascading from the roofs. Through the cracks in the walls, flashes of lightning painted the room in white. When the worst had passed, the rain softened to a steady drizzle. Thomas stepped back outside. The settlement shimmered with moisture. Puddles formed in every hollow. Smoke rose from the chimneys, carried away in wisps by the wind. The fields beyond the palisade glistened like mirrors. He walked toward the smithy, where a thin column of smoke curled upward through the rain. Inside, the blacksmith, Robert Denton, was already back at his forge, hammering a strip of iron into shape. Sparks flew with every strike. "You'd think the man never tires," Thomas said, half smiling. Robert grunted. "Tired men die here. I keep my hands busy." Thomas nodded. The words were simple but true. In this land, idleness meant death, whether from hunger, fever, or despair. Every person had a task, a duty, something to keep the settlement breathing. As the day moved toward afternoon, the rain eased. The clouds thinned, revealing pale sunlight filtering through. The world steamed, the scent of wet earth thick in the air. Thomas joined others in checking the outer walls for damage. Some of the logs had loosened under the pressure of wind and water. Together they lifted and reinforced them, driving stakes into the soft ground. From the forest's edge came a distant sound, a low, rhythmic drumming. The men froze. Every head turned toward the trees. "It's them," someone whispered. The drumming stopped as suddenly as it had begun. The forest fell silent again. Captain Smith appeared at once, musket in hand, his face grim. "Keep your posts," he ordered. "No one fires unless I say so. It could be nothing, or it could be everything." The colonists stood alert, eyes fixed on the tree line. Minutes passed. Nothing moved but the leaves. Finally, Smith lowered his weapon slightly. "They're watching," he said quietly. "Let them watch. We'll show them we fear nothing." But Thomas knew the fear was there. It lived in every man's chest, pulsing beneath the surface. The Powhatan were masters of the forest, unseen until they chose otherwise. The memory of past raids lingered in every mind. Friends lost. Supplies burned. The helplessness of being surrounded by a world that was not theirs. When the tension finally eased, the men returned to their tasks. The storm had left the air cool and sweet, and a faint rainbow arched above the treetops. The sound of hammers and saws filled the fort again, a rhythm of survival. By late afternoon, Martha called from the communal kitchen. "Supper soon. Bring water from the well." Thomas volunteered. He walked through the clearing, his boots squelching in the mud. The well stood at the center of the settlement, its stone rims slick with rain. As he turned the crank, the rope creaked and the bucket rose, glistening with clean, cold water. He paused a moment, listening to the distant murmur of voices, the crackle of fires, the laughter of a child, the son of one of the settlers. These small sounds, he thought, were what truly kept them alive. Not the walls or the weapons, but the fragile thread of humanity that bound them together in this far-off wilderness. As evening drew near, the sky cleared. The setting sun poured gold over the treetops, lighting the wet world in a soft glow. The colonists gathered outside to eat. Simple fare, corn mush, dried fish, and a thin broth flavored with herbs they had learned from the natives. Captain Smith stood among them, speaking of the next day's work, of repairing the damaged fences, tending the young crops, scouting the forest edge. His words were practical, but beneath them was the steady current of faith. "We survive one day at a time," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Each day we live as proof that we belong here." Thomas listened, the bowl warm in his hands. The day had been long, filled with labor, fear, and fleeting beauty. As the sun disappeared behind the trees, he looked toward the horizon, toward the endless forest and the unknown beyond it. Tomorrow would bring more toil, more risk, and perhaps a small taste of peace. But for now, under the fading light, they were alive. And that was enough. As the last streaks of sunlight faded behind the dense tree line, the settlement of Jamestown settled into a quieter rhythm. The day's labor was done, or at least paused, and the colonists began preparing for the long night ahead. Evening brought both relief and tension, a mixture of fatigue and the ever-present awareness that danger could strike in the darkness. Thomas Harwood walked slowly toward the communal kitchen, the damp earth muffling his footsteps. The evening air was cool, carrying the scent of wet wood and the faint tang of smoke from the hearths. Children played quietly near the huts, their laughter a fragile bubble against the backdrop of the forest's whispered secrets. Martha Price was tending the fire in the kitchen, stirring a pot of thin vegetable stew. The aroma of herbs mingled with the smell of damp clothing and wood smoke, creating a strange comfort in the small room. She looked up as Thomas entered, offering a tired but genuine smile. "Evening, Thomas," she said softly, ladling a small portion of stew into a wooden bowl. "Evening," he replied, taking it gratefully. They ate together in silence for a few moments, each lost in thought. The day's work weighed heavily on every colonist, and evening was the only time to pause and reflect. After supper, Thomas joined a small group of men near the palisade. They prepared the defenses for the night, checking locks, reinforcing doors, and setting sentries. Each man carried a musket or a pike, though ammunition was scarce and precious. The forest beyond the settlement was dark and dense, filled with unknown threats. "Keep your eyes open," John Smith instructed, walking among them. His tone was calm but firm. "The Powhatan are clever. They know these woods better than we ever will. Tonight, we must be vigilant." The men nodded, understanding that vigilance was survival. Thomas took up his position by the northern gate, scanning the shadowy tree line. His mind wandered to England, the crowded streets of London, the sound of church bells, the smell of rain on stone. He remembered his family, the comfort of familiar voices, the predictability of life in a world already mapped and ruled. Here, everything was uncertain. Every rustle in the underbrush could be harmless, or a warning of danger. The forest seemed alive, breathing and watching. And yet, amid the tension, there was beauty. Fireflies flickered above the wet ground, casting tiny sparks of light. The moon rose, pale and steady, reflecting in puddles and river bends. Within the settlement, life continued in small, intimate ways. Women patched clothing, repaired tools, and whispered softly to children who had grown up with the rhythm of this new world. Some knelt in quiet prayer, giving thanks for survival, for the crops that had grown, for the few moments of peace they had been granted. Religion was a central thread in the colonists' lives, a comfort and guide in a land that often seemed hostile and indifferent. Thomas returned to the longhouse after his watch, rubbing his hands for warmth. Around the hearth, several men discussed the day's events, the tone low and subdued. Illness had taken some of their number recently, and the reality of mortality was never far from anyone's mind. "I saw the Smith boys down by the river today," one man said quietly. "Fishing. They're growing fast. Soon they'll be taller than some of us." A few men chuckled softly. Laughter, even small, was rare and precious. It reminded them of the life they had left behind, and of the possibility that life here could continue, despite everything. As night deepened, Thomas stepped outside again. The forest loomed close, a wall of shadow and mystery. The moonlight lit the tops of the trees, creating a silver haze over the settlement. Owls called from the darkness, their mournful cries echoing across the river. The wind stirred the leaves, carrying whispers from places he could not see. He walked to the well, drawing a final bucket of water before retiring. The simple act grounded him, a connection to the earth and to the rhythm of survival. Water was life, and the act of drawing it was a ritual of presence, a reminder that, despite the uncertainty and danger, the day had been lived and survived. By late evening, most of the colonists had retired to their huts. The wooden walls were thin, letting the sounds of the night filter in. The patter of rain on the roof, the whisper of wind through the palisade, and the distant call of a night bird formed a symphony of the wilderness. Thomas lay on his straw mattress, listening. Sleep was elusive, but the quiet offered some solace. He thought of the morning yet to come. The work, the possibility of more storms, the ever-present threat of attack. And yet, he also thought of hope. Hope that the colony would endure, that life could be carved from the wild, that one day this place would not feel like a constant struggle but like home. He reflected on the shared human experiences that connected them all, the laughter of children, the warmth of companionship, the satisfaction of labor done well, the solace of prayer, the resilience forged in hardship. These were the threads that held the colony together, delicate yet unbreakable. The moon rose higher, and Thomas felt the weight of the day lift slowly from his shoulders. Sleep would come, and with it, dreams of home, of England, of survival, of a life shaped by both courage and chance. Outside, the settlement rested under a silver sky. Fires burned low, casting long shadows across the wet ground. The forest stood watch, indifferent and eternal. Within the palisade, life persisted, fragile but steadfast, and in the hearts of the colonists, the knowledge that tomorrow would demand courage anew. And in that moment, amid the quiet and the dark, Thomas Harwood allowed himself a fleeting sense of peace. For he was alive, and in the new world, that alone was victory. Night had fully descended upon the Jamestown settlement. The moon hung low and pale over the palisade, casting long, silvered shadows across the wet earth. The stars, clear and countless, stretched across the sky in a pattern both eternal and unfamiliar to the eyes of the colonists. For many, the heavens were a reminder of England, of familiar constellations and distant homes, though here they shone with a brilliance untouched by city lights. Inside the huts, families huddled together, seeking warmth and solace. Straw mats and rough blankets offered little comfort against the damp chill, but the presence of companions eased the sense of isolation. Thomas Harwood lay awake on his simple bedding, listening to the soft chorus of the night. Rain from earlier in the day still dripped from the eaves in steady, irregular drops. The wind rustled through the palisade, carrying the scent of pine and the distant river. Sleep came slowly, but in its place came reflection. The day had been long, filled with labor, fear, small joys, and fleeting moments of beauty. Thomas thought of the morning, of the mist over the river, of the tentative stirrings of life among the crops, of the laughter of children and the gentle presence of Martha. He thought of the forest beyond the walls, both threatening and magnificent, a realm that demanded respect and humility. He remembered the faces of those who had not survived, the pale, quiet forms buried beneath the modest crosses near the palisade. Their memory lingered as a solemn shadow, a reminder of the fragility of life in this new land. Yet their absence also reinforced the determination of the living, to endure, to work, to maintain hope. As Thomas drifted into a light sleep, dreams came unbidden. He found himself walking along the banks of the James River, the mist of morning returning to envelop him. In his dream, the river was calm and luminous, reflecting the sky as though it were a mirror. He saw figures moving along the water's edge. Some were colonists, their faces familiar, some were strangers from lands unknown. They beckoned to him silently, and he walked toward them with both curiosity and caution. The dream shifted. Now he was back in England, in a crowded market square, with cobblestones slick from rain. He could hear the clatter of carts, the chatter of merchants, the distant toll of a church bell. There was warmth, familiarity, and comfort, and yet the world he knew there felt distant, almost unreal. His heart ached with longing for home, for family, for the certainty of a place that no longer seemed to belong to him. In another vision, he walked through the forest at night. Shadows moved as if alive. Branches whispered secrets, and eyes glimmered in the darkness. Wild creatures, or perhaps spirits of the land itself. He felt fear, but also awe. The forest was alive with power beyond comprehension, a living entity that demanded both humility and courage. When he woke briefly, Thomas felt the weight of these visions linger. The night was quiet now, save for the occasional murmur of the river and the distant hoot of an owl. Around the settlement, fires burned low, their glow spilling softly through windows and doors. The hush of night brought clarity. Life here was precarious, each day earned through effort, vigilance, and resilience. He thought of the work that awaited at first light, tending crops, repairing the palisade, drawing water, fishing, and perhaps trading cautiously with neighboring tribes. The responsibilities were endless, yet each task carried significance. Every action mattered. Every effort was a step toward survival. Sleep claimed him again, deeper this time, weaving fragments of past and present together. In his dreams, he saw the faces of those he loved, some near, some far away. He saw the children laughing, the women working quietly, the men laboring under the sun. He saw storms and rivers, forests and plains, and through it all, a single, enduring thread: hope. Dawn approached silently, and with it, the subtle shift in the air, the promise of another day. The night had tested the colony, as it always did, but it had also offered moments of quiet reflection, of courage, and of dreamt visions that strengthened resolve. In the darkness, life had persisted, fragile yet unbroken. As Thomas stirred in the straw, preparing for the first light, he understood that the cycle would begin again. Each day in this new world demanded more than labor. It required faith, endurance, and the willingness to face uncertainty with measured courage. And each night offered a pause, a space for contemplation, a chance to dream of survival and the possibilities of tomorrow. The settlement rested beneath the moon, a small cluster of human perseverance amid the vast, indifferent wilderness. And within that human enclave, each colonist carried stories, fears, memories, and hopes. Threads that wove together the fragile tapestry of life in the New World. For Thomas Harwood, as for all who endured the challenges of Jamestown, the night was both a respite and a preparation. It was a time to honor the past, acknowledge the present, and quietly anticipate the dawn, when the labor of life would resume under the ever-watchful sky. Dawn arrived gently, painting the horizon in muted shades of pink and gold. The James River, calm and reflective, mirrored the awakening sky. Mist lingered above its surface, curling around the banks like a slow-moving specter. The sounds of morning began softly, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a heron, and the low murmur of the settlement stirring to life. Thomas Harwood rose from his straw bedding, muscles stiff but accustomed to the rigor of life in Jamestown. The previous day's work, storm, and night watch lingered in his body, yet the call of labor was relentless. He dressed in a rough linen shirt and woolen breeches, fastening the leather ties carefully. Every stitch and seam mattered here. Clothing was precious, and repairs were constant. Outside, The settlement was alive with motion. Men and women moved through the mist, each attending to the rituals that marked the beginning of another day. Some drew water from the well, buckets squeaking against the stone rim. Others stoked fires, coaxing embers back to life for cooking and warmth. Children followed older siblings or parents, their small hands gripping tools too large for them, learning the rhythm of survival by imitation. Thomas met John Smith near the palisade. The captain, ever vigilant, was already inspecting the boundaries. His eyes swept the forest line with precision, noting fallen branches and any signs of recent animal tracks. "We must be alert," Smith said quietly. "Even morning is not free from danger. Nature itself can challenge us, and others may watch from the woods." The men nodded, understanding the weight of his words. Even a seemingly ordinary day could bring hazards, sudden storms, disease, or unexpected encounters with the Powhatan. Survival demanded attention to detail, a disciplined mind, and steady hands. Thomas's first task was the fields. Rows of young corn stretched before him, their green shoots vivid against the dark, damp soil. With a hoe in hand, he walked the rows, checking for weeds, pests, and signs of disease. He recalled the lessons taught by the native people, the planting of companion crops, the nurturing of soil, the use of ash and fish as fertilizer. These practices were not only practical but essential for sustaining life in a land unfamiliar and often unforgiving. By mid-morning, a group of men gathered at the riverbank for fishing. Thomas joined them, casting nets into the slow-moving water. The rhythm of the river was steady, almost hypnotic, and for a brief moment, he felt a rare sense of calm. Nets were pulled and baited, fish counted and cleaned, the spoils of the river shared among the settlers. Each small success was celebrated quietly, for every meal procured meant another day survived. Martha and the women worked nearby, washing clothes, grinding corn, and preparing meals for the laborers. Their movements were precise and efficient, honed by necessity and years of practice. The division of labor was clear, each task integral to the community's survival. Yet there was also room for shared laughter and conversation, small threads of normalcy that reminded them all of human connection amid hardship. By late morning, the sun had climbed higher, burning off the morning mist. The heat pressed upon the settlement, sticky and relentless. Sweat soaked through Thomas's shirt as he returned to the fields, tilling stubborn soil, repairing irrigation channels, and ensuring the young crops were well cared for. Each effort mattered. Failure could mean hunger, and survival was never guaranteed in this new land. Occasionally, he glanced toward the forest. Shadows shifted beneath the tall trees, a reminder that the wilderness was always present, watching, and unpredictable. The Powhatan could move silently among these trees, and though there had been trade, tensions remained. Understanding and caution were vital, yet fear was constant. Lunch was a modest affair, eaten beneath the shade of a lone oak. Corn porridge, salted fish, and a few wild herbs provided nourishment, though never enough to satisfy a man fully. Conversation was quiet, punctuated by the occasional laugh or remark about the day's work. The settlers shared what little they had, bound together by necessity and the fragile threads of community. After the meal, Thomas returned to the river, checking traps and nets, while others repaired tools or maintained the palisade. The forest beyond was alive with the calls of birds, the rustle of small animals, and the distant roar of a waterfall further upriver. Each sound was a reminder of life's continuity, even amid the daily struggle. By late afternoon, the work of the day drew to a close. The sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the settlement. Fires were lit, and smoke curled into the sky, signaling the approach of evening. The colonists gathered their tools, tending to minor repairs and preparing for the night ahead. Vigilance never fully ceased. The dangers of the wilderness demanded attention at all hours. As Thomas paused to drink from the river, he reflected on the patterns of life here. The endless labor, the persistent threat of disease, the delicate negotiations with nature and neighbors, and the small but vital moments of triumph. Each day was a cycle of effort and endurance, yet also of discovery and adaptation. The sight of fish glinting in the sunlight, the smell of wet soil, and the rhythm of labor created a sense of connection to the land that Thomas had never known in England. Here, every action had purpose, every observation mattered, and every success was hard-won. By dusk, Thomas and the settlers returned to the fort, carrying their spoils and repairing what the day had strained. Fires were stoked, meals prepared, and the settlement slowly settled into the quiet anticipation of nightfall. The river reflected the fiery colors of sunset, and the forest's edge seemed to shimmer with hidden life. Even in the face of hardship, moments of beauty were found, reflected in the water, in the faces of children, in the shared laughter of companions, and in the simple triumph of a day survived in the new world. Thomas stood for a moment at the palisade, breathing in the scent of pine and river, letting the calm of the evening wash over him. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new labor, and new tests of endurance. Yet for now, there was a sense of quiet satisfaction, the knowledge that another day had been met with courage and diligence, that the colony persisted, and that life, however fragile, continued. The sun had finally dipped below the horizon, leaving behind a deepening twilight. The sky was painted in muted shades of violet and amber, fading gradually into the dark canopy of night. Jamestown, a cluster of wooden huts and palisades, rested beneath this twilight, the settlement alive with the subtle rhythms of preparation for the coming darkness. Thomas Harwood moved quietly through the settlement, performing the last tasks of the day. The communal kitchen had cooled. Smoke from fires rose lazily into the night, carrying the faint scent of burnt wood and herbs. Children were tucked into straw bedding, their breathing slow and steady. Women tended to laundry, repaired clothes, and ensured that food stores were secured for the night. Every action, though small, contributed to the survival of the colony. Outside, men checked the palisade one last time. Gates were reinforced, spikes examined, and muskets cleaned and readied for use. Even minor oversights could have fatal consequences. Thomas ran his fingers along the wet wood, feeling the rough texture, and ensured that every latch held fast. Each careful movement was a silent acknowledgement of the fragility of life here. By the fire pit near the center of the settlement, a few colonists gathered for a brief reprieve. The flames flickered, casting long shadows on the walls of the huts. Captain John Smith stood among them, speaking quietly about the day's work and the importance of vigilance. He reminded them that survival depended not only on labor but on awareness, cooperation, and courage. Thomas listened, sipping from a small wooden cup of weak tea. The warmth spread through his body, a small comfort against the evening chill. Around the fire, stories began to circulate, tales of past hardships, adventures in the New World, and memories of England. These narratives served multiple purposes. They entertained, instructed, and strengthened the bonds of community. In sharing their experiences, the colonists reaffirmed their shared humanity and resilience. Martha Price sat nearby, quietly weaving a patch for a worn shirt. Her hands moved methodically, the work both meditative and necessary. Thomas watched her for a moment, grateful for her steady presence. Life in the settlement demanded endurance, but moments of companionship and shared purpose provided emotional sustenance as vital as food or shelter. The conversation around the fire shifted naturally to the wilderness beyond the palisade. The Powhatan, ever present yet unseen, were a frequent subject of discussion. Stories of past encounters, both peaceful and hostile, were recounted with care. Each tale carried lessons, the importance of caution, the value of understanding, and the limits of human control in this vast, untamed land. As the sky darkened, Thomas felt a quiet awe. The forest beyond the settlement seemed almost sentient, alive with sounds that were both alien and familiar. The rustle of leaves, the distant call of an owl, and the whisper of the wind through the trees created a symphony of nature's presence. Here, in the midst of this wilderness, humanity was both small and resilient. Religious reflection was another constant. Evening prayers were common, whether whispered in solitude or recited collectively. Thomas knelt by his bedding, eyes closed, offering thanks for survival, for the strength to endure, and for the promise of tomorrow. Faith was not merely ritual. It was a source of comfort and structure in a life where uncertainty was the only certainty. Night deepened, and the settlement settled into a tentative quiet. Only the watchmen remained alert, their eyes and ears attuned to the slightest movement beyond the walls. Thomas, having completed his tasks, allowed himself to rest for a while beside the fire, feeling the warmth seep into his muscles. The glow of the flames illuminated the determined faces of his fellow colonists, faces weathered by sun, wind, and the trials of daily survival. The firelight revealed subtle gestures of care, a hand on a child's shoulder, a nod of encouragement between laborers, a shared smile amidst fatigue. These moments, though fleeting, reinforced the social fabric of the settlement. Survival was not only about skill or courage, it was about trust, empathy, and the willingness to share burdens. As the flames burned lower, Thomas contemplated the day's events and the days ahead. Each dawn brought new challenges, each night offered rest and reflection. The settlement's continued existence was a testament to human adaptability, perseverance, and the quiet heroism of ordinary acts. Finally, he retreated to his hut, carefully closing the door against the night. The sounds of the forest surrounded him, the croak of frogs, the rustle of small creatures, the distant lap of river water. Sleep beckoned, and Thomas lay on his straw mattress, muscles sore but spirit sustained. In the stillness, he reflected on what it meant to carve a life from this new world. Each day, each task, each moment of vigilance contributed to something larger than himself. Here, in this fragile settlement at the edge of the wilderness, human effort, courage, and hope intertwined with the rhythms of nature. The night passed quietly, the fire dying low, the stars wheeling across the sky. In dreams, Thomas revisited the day's labors and small triumphs, imagined the challenges ahead, and glimpsed the promise of growth and continuity. Each dawn would bring fresh work, fresh uncertainty, and fresh opportunity. And with each passing day, the settlement, fragile though it was, endured. The morning broke slowly over Jamestown, the river glinting with pale light, and mist curling lazily over the banks. The air was cool, fragrant with damp earth and the lingering scent of pine from the surrounding forest. Thomas Harwood rose early, as he had done every day since arriving in the New World. The colony's survival depended on diligence, and idle moments were rare luxuries. After dressing and taking a quick meal of corn porridge, Thomas set out toward the riverbank, where a small group of men and women were preparing for the morning's work. Among them were scouts, sent to monitor the edges of the forest for signs of wildlife or the movements of neighboring Powhatan tribes. Though previous encounters had varied from trade to tension, contact remained essential for mutual understanding and survival. Thomas met Captain John Smith near the palisade. Smith was already reviewing plans for the day, speaking in a low voice to several men. "Today we will maintain relations," he said, "and trade where possible. The Powhatan have knowledge and resources that are vital to us. Approach with caution, respect, and openness." The colonists packed small gifts, iron tools, beads, and cloth. These were tokens of goodwill, exchanged for corn, game, and local knowledge of the land. Thomas carried a bundle of woven cloth and simple metal implements, feeling the weight of diplomacy in addition to the literal weight of his burden. As they approached the forest edge, the world shifted. Trees towered overhead, casting long shadows over the moss-covered ground. Birds called from hidden perches, and the rustle of small animals sounded softly beneath the undergrowth. The colonists moved with care, alert to every sound and movement. The forest was beautiful and deadly, full of life yet indifferent to human presence. Soon, figures emerged from the trees. The Powhatan approached with measured steps, their faces painted in patterns that marked clan and status. Thomas noted their grace and attentiveness, their awareness of the environment surpassing any he had seen in England. There was tension in the air, but also recognition of the mutual need for communication and exchange. Gifts were exchanged carefully, words spoken slowly through gestures, basic English, and a shared understanding of commerce. Corn was handed to the settlers, along with smoked fish and wild herbs. In return, the Powhatan accepted iron tools, cloth, and beads. Each transaction was deliberate, a negotiation of trust, resource, and survival. After the trade, Thomas and the other colonists observed the Powhatan for a moment, learning techniques for fishing, trapping, and planting. Knowledge of the land was as valuable as any tool, and these exchanges offered insights that could mean the difference between scarcity and sustenance. Returning to the settlement, Thomas took part in the morning chores. Children were present, learning the rhythm of life from their parents. They carried water, helped tend animals, and observed the older settlers work with keen interest. Education here was practical. Survival skills, moral guidance, and knowledge of the land passed down through observation and practice. By mid-morning, Thomas helped repair a section of the palisade damaged during the previous storm. Men lifted heavy logs, drove stakes into the wet earth, and reinforced the walls with mud and rope. Sweat ran freely in the warmth of the sun, but each strike of the hammer and each thrust of the post brought security to the settlement. Women worked nearby, tending gardens and preparing meals from the produce received through trade in the colony's own fields. The scent of cooking filled the air: boiled greens, roasted fish, and corn mush. It was humble fare, yet it nourished the body and spirit alike. Throughout the morning, the colonists remained alert to signs of wildlife and movement in the forest. Thomas paused occasionally, scanning the tree line for deer or turkey, noting the tracks of smaller animals. These observations informed their work and ensured a steady supply of food beyond the cultivated fields. The afternoon brought further exchanges with the Powhatan, as some traders returned with more corn and instructions for planting. Thomas assisted in unloading and storing provisions, ensuring they were protected from rain and pests. Every seed, every fish, every kernel of corn was precious, symbols of life and hope in this challenging new world. By late afternoon, the sun began its descent, casting long shadows over the settlement. The day had been productive, each interaction and task contributing to the colony's survival. Thomas paused by the river, watching the sunlight glimmer across the ripples, and felt a sense of accomplishment. Knowledge, labor, and diplomacy had worked together to sustain them through another day. As evening approached, the colonists returned to their daily routines, preparing food, repairing clothing, checking tools, and settling children for the night. The rhythms of life in Jamestown were unceasing, yet structured. Labor, reflection, learning, and care intertwined, creating a cycle that sustained both body and spirit. Thomas lingered for a moment, considering the day's lessons. Survival in the New World required more than strength. It required adaptability, observation, and respect for the land and its people. The Powhatan were both teachers and reminders of the world beyond the palisade, a world that could provide sustenance or pose danger, depending on the choices made. By nightfall, the settlement settled into quiet again. Fires burned low, the smell of cooked food lingered, and the distant forest whispered secrets to the wind. Thomas retired to his hut, exhausted but aware of the continuous cycle of life, learning, and labor that defined each day. He lay on his straw bedding, listening to the night sounds, and reflected on the interconnectedness of all that had occurred: labor, trade, teaching, and learning. Every action mattered, every choice shaped the future. And in this fragile yet determined community, life endured, nurtured by courage, knowledge, and the persistent hope of those willing to shape a life from the wilderness. The late afternoon sun cast a warm glow over the Jamestown settlement, illuminating the worn wooden palisade and the simple huts nestled within. Shadows stretched long across the wet soil, and the air held the subtle, earthy scent of the forest. The day's labor was nearing its end, but work and vigilance remained necessary until darkness fully descended. Thomas Harwood walked slowly through the settlement, checking the tools were stored, food provisions secured, and the palisade held firm. The men were finishing their tasks, the rhythmic sounds of hammering and sawing slowly fading. Women tended to children, washed utensils, and repaired clothing, their hands moving skillfully and deliberately. Every action, no matter how small, reinforced the survival of the community. As the sun lowered, the colonists gathered near the central fire pit, a ritual as familiar as it was essential. Fires were lit, casting warm light and long shadows across the clearing. Around the flames, men, women, and children came together to share the day's experiences, offer advice, and impart lessons. Storytelling was a vital part of these gatherings, serving to educate, entertain, and strengthen bonds. Thomas settled near the fire, his hands warmed by the gentle heat. Martha Price joined him, carrying a small bowl of stew. Children sat cross-legged nearby, eyes wide with attention, as Captain John Smith recounted tales of survival, of distant lands, and of the challenges they had faced upon arrival in the New World. His stories were a mix of caution and inspiration, reminding everyone of the importance of courage, vigilance, and cooperation. Other colonists added their voices, recounting small victories, a repaired fence, a successful fishing trip, or a plot of corn that had thrived despite the storm. These shared experiences reinforced the community's resilience. In Jamestown, no individual survived alone. Every triumph, no matter how minor, was a collective achievement. Religious practice was intertwined with these gatherings. Evening prayers were offered, thanking God for the day's safety, for sustenance, and for the strength to endure. Some recited scripture, others spoke in quiet reflection, yet all participated in acknowledging the unseen guidance that shaped their lives. Faith provided structure and comfort in a world fraught with uncertainty and danger. The forest beyond the palisade remained a constant presence. Its shadows seemed to dance with the firelight, a reminder of both beauty and danger. The colonists remained alert, understanding that the wilderness was indifferent to their existence. Yet in these shared moments, they could pause and appreciate the majesty of their surroundings. The whisper of wind through tall trees, the distant call of a night bird, the shimmering reflection of the river in fading light. Thomas listened attentively to the stories and lessons, recognizing the value in both practical knowledge and shared culture. The narratives conveyed survival strategies, moral guidance, and a sense of continuity, linking the present to the past and providing hope for the future. As darkness deepened, the community transitioned to quieter routines. Children were led to their sleeping mats, tucked under rough blankets. The older settlers tended fires, replenished water supplies, and ensured that the settlement's defenses were prepared for nightfall. Even in these quiet moments, vigilance was maintained, for the forest was never entirely still, and the Powhatan presence was always a subtle reminder of potential conflict. Thomas and Martha shared a brief moment of conversation, reflecting on the day's successes and challenges. Their exchanges were calm, a mixture of companionship and quiet gratitude for shared endurance. Life in the settlement demanded attention to others as well as oneself, and bonds formed through shared labor and mutual support were as essential as any tool or weapon. By night, the central fire burned low, casting a soft, flickering light. The colonists huddled near it, drawing warmth and comfort from the flames. Stories became quieter, prayers softer, and the communal energy shifted toward reflection and rest. Each individual carried their thoughts inward, contemplating the day past and the uncertainty of the day to come. In the solitude of his hut, Thomas lay upon his straw mattress, listening to the gentle sounds of the night, the rustle of leaves, the lap of the river against the banks, the distant cries of nocturnal creatures. Sleep beckoned, yet before surrendering to it, he allowed his mind to wander. Thoughts of England, of family, and of the life left behind mingled with the practical considerations of survival and the quiet pride in what had been achieved. Evening rituals, though simple, were profound. They reinforced a sense of community, imparted knowledge, and provided emotional and spiritual sustenance. In Jamestown, survival was inseparable from these shared moments that reminded the colonists of their humanity amid the challenges of the wilderness. As the last embers glowed, Thomas closed his eyes. The night held promise and peril, but also rest, reflection, and preparation. And in that stillness, the colony endured, a small but steadfast human presence at the edge of an immense and untamed land. Night had fully enveloped the Jamestown settlement. The sky was dark and vast, pierced by countless stars that reflected faintly on the calm surface of the James River. A cool wind stirred through the palisade, carrying the faint rustle of leaves and distant calls of nocturnal creatures. Inside the settlement, most of the colonists slept, trusting the careful watches set at strategic points along the fort's perimeter. Thomas Harwood, having volunteered for the night watch, stepped quietly into the darkness. His musket was slung across his back, and his eyes adjusted to the dim moonlight. Each footstep on the damp earth was measured and deliberate. Tonight's vigilance was crucial, both to guard against possible attacks and to monitor the forest's hidden dangers. The rhythm of patrol was slow and deliberate. Thomas walked along the palisade, pausing at each gate, listening for unusual sounds. The forest beyond loomed as a solid wall of shadow, every tree a potential hiding place for wildlife or, perhaps, more dangerous visitors. Even the night's calm held tension. Every rustle of leaves could be a deer, a fox, or something far more threatening. At the eastern gate, Thomas noticed a faint glimmer, a reflection of moonlight off metal. He froze, muscles taut, eyes scanning the darkness. Slowly, he approached, musket raised, ready to identify the source. It was only a piece of the previous day's tools, left carelessly near the palisade, catching the light. A sigh of relief escaped him, but the tension lingered, a reminder of the constant alertness demanded by this land. Further along, he paused to observe the forest. Owls glided silently between the trees, their wide eyes reflecting the moonlight. Small animals moved in the underbrush, their presence a subtle reassurance that life thrived even in the shadow of danger. Thomas noted the tracks in the mud: deer, raccoon, and something larger. Perhaps a bear. Each observation was both practical and meditative, connecting him to the rhythms of the wilderness in a way that daylight hours rarely allowed. Hours passed, slow and unbroken. The other men on watch took turns calling out brief observations, maintaining communication across the silent settlement. Their voices, low and cautious, punctuated the night like the occasional crackle of fire. There was camaraderie in this shared vigilance, a sense of unity forged by the mutual responsibility of survival. Suddenly, a distant sound echoed from the forest, branches snapping under the weight of something unseen. Thomas stiffened, signaling to the nearby sentinel. Hearts pounded as all eyes turned toward the sound. The rustling grew louder, approaching the clearing near the settlement. A figure emerged, an unexpected visitor. Relief flooded the colonists as they recognized a Powhatan hunter, moving cautiously toward the palisade. Through gestures and the limited shared language, he communicated a warning. A storm was approaching from the west, heavier than any of the recent rains. His presence, though initially startling, was invaluable. Knowledge from the indigenous people could save crops, prevent damage, and protect lives. The colonists quickly took action. Lanterns were lit, huts were reinforced, and animals were moved to safer shelters. Thomas assisted in securing loose tools and tying down supplies that might be swept away by wind or rain. Every movement was urgent, yet precise, shaped by experience, necessity, and the understanding that preparedness could mean the difference between disaster and survival. As the storm drew closer, the wind began to rise, whistling through the gaps in the palisade. Rain fell in sheets, drumming against the roofs and pooling in hollows of the settlement. The river swelled slightly, its waters reflecting the intermittent flashes of distant lightning. Inside the huts, families huddled together, listening to the storm and feeling the comforting presence of fire and each other. Thomas remained on watch, leaning against the palisade, his clothes soaked, muscles aching, but mind alert. He observed how the colony responded to the challenge. Cooperation, efficiency, and calm determination. Each colonist contributed in small but meaningful ways, reinforcing the sense that survival was a shared effort. Hours later, as the storm passed and the rain softened to a drizzle, Thomas conducted a final round of the settlement. Damage was minimal, thanks to their preparedness and the guidance of their Powhatan visitor. Relief spread quietly among the night watch, a shared acknowledgement of both the colony's resilience and the fragility of life on the frontier. By dawn, Thomas returned to his straw bedding, exhausted but satisfied. The forest around Jamestown was calm once more, the river reflecting the first light of day. The night's vigilance had ensured the settlement's safety, providing another opportunity to continue building life in this new world. As he lay down, Thomas reflected on the interplay of risk and knowledge, of human effort and natural forces. Each day and night was a lesson in endurance, cooperation, and humility. Survival required more than strength. It demanded awareness, adaptability, and the willingness to act decisively when the moment arose. The night watch had passed, but the day would begin anew. The cycle of labor, vigilance, learning, and reflection continued, threading the lives of the colonists together in a tapestry of courage and hope. And as Thomas drifted into sleep, the forest whispered softly around him, a constant reminder of the vast, untamed world in which they strove to carve a life. The sun sank low over the horizon, casting a warm, amber glow across Jamestown. Shadows stretched long over the wet soil, the palisade, and the huts that formed the heart of the colony. The river mirrored the fading light, its surface calm and reflective, as though holding its breath for the night to come. Thomas Harwood walked slowly through the settlement, observing the last tasks of the day being completed. Fires were stoked, animals fed, tools stored, and food supplies checked. The rhythm of the colony continued, a constant cycle of labor, vigilance, and care. Even as exhaustion weighed heavily upon their bodies, the colonists understood that the effort of each day was essential for survival. Children were gathered inside huts, their small voices hushed as mothers readied them for rest. Laughter and whispered stories of the day gave way to quiet breathing and the occasional rustle of straw bedding. These moments of calm reminded the settlers of the enduring presence of life, even in a land that often seemed hostile and unpredictable. Thomas paused by the central fire pit, watching as the last sparks faded into the cool evening air. Around him, the settlement exhaled collectively, the day's toil transitioning into reflection. Conversations were soft, voices sharing small triumphs, lessons learned, or observations of the surrounding wilderness. In these exchanges, the colonists found reassurance, companionship, and a sense of purpose.
Martha Price approached, carrying a small bowl of stew for the evening meal. They sat together, quietly sharing the modest food, their conversation muted yet comforting. The day had been long, filled with labor, vigilance, learning, and brief moments of joy. Now, in the fading light, there was time for contemplation.
Even as they ate, Thomas's mind wandered to the broader horizon, the survival of the colony, the uncertainties of the new world, and the promise of growth. Each day offered lessons, both harsh and subtle, teaching them to respect the land, understand its rhythms, and adapt with diligence and care. The balance of life here required constant awareness, collaboration, and patience. As the sky deepened into twilight, the settlers gathered once more near the fire pit. Stories were shared, some of the day's work, some of the past, and some of hopes for the future. Captain John Smith spoke of perseverance, the importance of learning from both the land and the people who knew it best, and the necessity of unity. Each tale reinforced the moral and practical foundations that sustained the colony. Religious reflection was woven seamlessly into these evening gatherings. Prayers were offered for continued health, for guidance, for protection, and for the endurance of the settlement. Faith provided solace and structure, comforting those who faced the relentless uncertainty of life in a new world. In the light of the fire, faces glowed with quiet reverence, a community united by labor, belief, and shared hope. The forest beyond the palisade was alive with nocturnal sounds, the call of owls, the rustle of small animals, and the whispering of the wind through the trees. Thomas listened, mindful of the potential dangers and appreciative of the wilderness's subtle beauty. Life in Jamestown existed in constant dialogue with the land. Respect, caution, and understanding were as vital as any tool or skill. By nightfall, the colony had settled into quietude. The last fires burned low, the river reflected the moon's silver light, and the forest loomed as a dark and eternal presence. Thomas lay upon his straw mattress, muscles sore, body fatigued, yet spirit sustained by the knowledge that another day had been met with courage and perseverance. He reflected on the delicate balance of life in the settlement, the interplay of labor and rest, fear and hope, survival and growth. Each day was a thread in the fabric of their existence, woven from the shared experiences, sacrifices, and resilience of the colonists. Though the land was untamed and challenges unending, the community endured, drawing strength from one another and from the knowledge that every small effort mattered. As Thomas drifted towards sleep, he allowed himself to envision the future. Perhaps one day, this settlement would grow into something enduring, a place where children would know safety, where the colony could thrive, and where the hardships of today would be remembered as the foundation of a new life. For now, survival remained the priority, but hope and determination intertwined, shaping the resolve of every individual within the fort. Outside, the night was calm. The river reflected the stars, the forest whispered softly, and the wind carried distant scents of pine, earth, and river water. Within the palisade, life persisted, quiet, fragile, yet steadfast. Thomas felt the rhythm of the colony around him, a heartbeat of human endeavor, courage, and aspiration. Sleep finally claimed him, and with it came dreams of home, of England, of loved ones left behind, and of the possibility that life here could endure and flourish. The night was both a pause and a promise, a bridge between the labor of today and the challenges of tomorrow. And as the first light of a new day began to hint at the horizon, Thomas Harwood, like all the settlers of Jamestown, rested with the quiet knowledge that survival, though precarious, was their shared triumph, and that with each sunrise, they would rise again to meet the new world with courage, perseverance, and hope.